What if the very thing society calls normal is the very thing slowly destroying our souls? We live in a culture where lust is no longer hidden in the shadows. It's advertised, celebrated, and even defended as harmless. But here's the trap. When sin is normalized, it doesn't look like sin anymore. It looks like freedom, and that is where the deception takes root. Think about it. The more we see something, the less shocking it becomes. What once stirred the conscience now barely raises an eyebrow. What once felt dangerous now feels ordinary. And the enemy knows this, because if he can convince us that lust is just part of being human, then he has already blinded us from the chains it forges around the heart. But here's the unsettling question. Is it really harmless, or are we trading something far greater? Real intimacy, real joy, real freedom, for a shallow thrill that leaves us emptier every time. The truth is, lust promises satisfaction, but always demands more. It creates hunger without ever feeding it. And in that endless cycle, we lose not only our purity, but our very sense of who we are. Yet there is hope, because the same desire that lust corrupts can be transformed, realigned, and set free to bring life instead of destruction. By the end of this, you'll see why the culture's definition of normal is the very thing that keeps us enslaved, and how breaking free from it opens the door to a joy this world cannot counterfeit. So stay with me, because once you see through the illusion, you'll never look at this so-called normal the same way again. Lust disguises itself as harmless pleasure, but it silently chains the soul. Discover 7 biblical secrets to destroy lust before it destroys you. Grab your copy in the description now. Desire itself is not the enemy. The human heart was created with longing for beauty, connection, intimacy, and love. But here's the danger. When that longing is twisted from its true purpose, it becomes something entirely different. What God designed as a reflection of his goodness is hijacked, bent inward, and consumed for selfish ends. And once desire is corrupted, it ceases to lead us toward life. Instead, it begins to devour us from the inside out. Consider how quickly this shift happens. A pure longing for closeness turns into a craving for possession. A natural attraction becomes an obsession. The very energy meant to bind two souls in covenant suddenly becomes the fuel for consuming others as objects. That is the subtle power of corruption. It doesn't erase the desire itself, it distorts it. Like a stream of water redirected into polluted ground. The source may be pure, but the flow is poisoned. And what makes this so dangerous is how easily we justify it. We say it's just a thought, it's just a feeling, it's not hurting anyone. Yet every time we surrender to distorted desire, something within us shifts. It reprograms the mind, shaping how we see others, and more tragically, how we see ourselves. People are no longer seen as sacred image bearers of God, but as tools for gratification. And when that lens becomes our default, love itself is replaced with consumption. This is why the battle against lust feels endless. It is not merely about controlling behavior. It is about the direction of the heart. You can try to chain the external actions, but if the inner desire has been warped, the struggle will never end. Imagine trying to hold back a raging river with your bare hands. The pressure builds until it bursts through. That is what happens when we treat distorted desire as if it were harmless. It grows stronger the more it is ignored. But here's the truth many avoid. Disordered desire always leaves us emptier. It never delivers what it promised. The momentary thrill fades quickly, but it leaves a residue: shame, dissatisfaction, restlessness, and the cycle repeats: craving, indulging, regretting, and craving again. It's a loop that chains the soul, because no amount of indulgence can fill the void left when desire has been torn from its true purpose. Yet this is not meant to crush us with guilt. It is meant to awaken us to reality, because hidden beneath the corruption, the original design of desire still remains. What was meant for love, covenant, and life can be restored, but it requires an honest reckoning, a willingness to admit that what the world calls freedom has actually enslaved us. Only then can we begin to redirect desire back to its proper place. Think of desire like fire. In the fireplace, fire warms, gives light, and creates life in the home. But when it spills outside its boundaries, it burns, destroys, and consumes everything in its path. Desire was never meant to be extinguished. It was meant to be contained within God's design. That is where its power becomes beautiful instead of destructive. So the real question is this: will we allow our desires to rule us, or will we master them by surrendering them to the one who gave them in the first place? If left unchecked, Desire twisted by lust will consume our minds, our relationships, and our future. But when it is surrendered, it becomes a force for life, binding us to true love, not counterfeit passion. This is where the battle lines are drawn. It's not about rejecting desire altogether, but about refusing to let it be corrupt. Because only when we restore it to its rightful place do we experience the joy, the intimacy, and the freedom that was always meant to be ours. Have you noticed how the things that once shocked us no longer even make us flinch? The images, the jokes, the subtle messages in entertainment, what once seemed shameful is now celebrated as casual, funny, or even empowering. That's the subtle danger of a world that constantly repeats one message. This is normal. Don't feel guilty. Don't resist. Just accept it. But here's the question worth asking. Who decided what normal should be? And what happens when normal is built on a lie? The truth is, our conscience was never meant to be numbed. It was meant to warn us, to protect us, to remind us when something is eroding our soul. Yet when lust gets dressed up as culture, when it is slipped into music, movies, and even everyday conversation, it starts to bypass that warning system. What used to feel dangerous is suddenly rebranded as harmless. The trap isn't that we feel tempted. The trap is that we stop even noticing temptation at all. Think about how gradual this shift really is. The first time we're exposed to certain things, there's a reaction inside us. It feels heavy. It feels off. But the 10th time, the 100th time, that inner resistance fades. What was once a flashing red light becomes a faint whisper, until finally it goes silent altogether. And that silence is deadly, because silence makes us believe nothing is wrong. Here's the deception. When society normalizes lust, it doesn't eliminate the consequences. The broken relationships, the loneliness, the emptiness, the addiction, those don't disappear just because people stop talking about them. They only become harder to trace back to the root, because the root has been buried under the word normal. It's like a poison hidden in plain sight, poured into a cup and labeled safe to drink. The label doesn't change the poison, and it doesn't just shape individuals, it shapes generations. When children grow up in a culture where lust is everywhere, they're being trained not only to accept it but to expect it. They don't have to go looking for it, it comes looking for them. And by the time they're old enough to question it, the grip is already there. That's how entire societies lose their sense of purity, because the idea of purity itself starts to sound strange, outdated, or even oppressive. The most dangerous lies are always the ones that sound the most reasonable. Everyone does it. What's the harm? It's just natural. But look deeper. If something truly brings freedom, why does it enslave so many? If it's really harmless, why does it leave behind so much pain? The normalization of lust is like convincing a prisoner that the chains around his wrists are actually jewelry. He might stop struggling, but he's still not free. And that's why seeing through this illusion is so crucial. As long as you believe lust is just part of life, you'll never fight it. You'll never question it. You'll never even think about resisting, because resistance seems unnecessary. That's the strategy. Make you stop noticing the battle so you stop fighting altogether. But here's the good news. Once you recognize the trap, you've already taken the first step to escape it. Awareness reawakens the conscience. What was once dulled can be sharpened again. You begin to see things differently, not through the lens of culture, but through the lens of truth. You realize that the normal you've been sold is actually the abnormality, and what God designed is the real standard that leads to life. So ask yourself, are you being shaped by the culture around you, or by the calling placed within you? Because if culture can convince you to accept chains as normal, it will keep you enslaved. But if you choose to see clearly, you'll realize that you were never meant to settle for normal at all. You were created for freedom, for holiness, for a joy that no amount of empty pleasure could ever counterfeit. Freedom. That word carries so much power. Everyone wants it. Everyone craves it. And in our modern world, it's preached like a gospel of its own. Do whatever you want. Follow your desires. Don't let anyone tell you no. It sounds bold. It sounds liberating. It even feels like rebellion against restraint. But here's the question no one wants to ask. If we're so free, then why are we so enslaved? Think about it. The culture tells us to indulge in whatever cravings come naturally, especially when it comes to lust. It's painted as empowerment, as maturity, even as a rite of passage into adulthood. But when something promises you freedom while tightening invisible chains around your soul, is it truly freedom, or just another form of slavery dressed in a glittering disguise. The trap lies in the first. Lust whispers that it's just curiosity, just one harmless glance, just one private indulgence. And at first it seems like nothing has changed. You still feel in control. You still think you can stop whenever you want. That's the illusion. It convinces you that you're steering the ship while slowly taking the wheel from your hands. By the time you realize what's happening, the habit has already dug deep into your heart. And here's the cruel irony. What we call freedom often means being ruled by our own appetites. We're told to obey every desire, every urge, as if saying no would somehow make us less human. But if every desire must be obeyed, then you're no longer free. You're a slave to impulses that never stop demanding more. Real freedom isn't the ability to say yes to everything. Real freedom is the strength to say no. Lust never tells you about the cost. It won't warn you about the emptiness that follows, the dull ache that comes when the moment fades. It won't mention how the appetite grows stronger while your ability to resist grows weaker. It won't show you how the soul becomes restless, always searching, never satisfied. Because here's the truth. When you give lust what it craves, it doesn't go away, it only multiplies. And the more you feed it, the hungrier it becomes. That's not liberation. That's bondage. That's a cage without visible bars. And the reason it's so dangerous is because it doesn't look like a cage at all. It feels good in the moment. It feels natural. It feels like freedom. But true freedom doesn't leave you emptier than before. True freedom doesn't consume you with guilt, shame, and annoying sense of dissatisfaction. Now here's the breakthrough. Real freedom isn't found in following every craving. It's found in mastering them. It's found in reclaiming the authority that was handed over to lust and choosing to walk a different path. Imagine living with desires that no longer control you, where your eyes and heart are not enslaved to what flashes before them, but instead anchored in something far stronger, far purer, far more fulfilling. The world sells a cheap counterfeit of freedom, instant gratification, shallow pleasure, endless indulgence. But the soul was never designed to thrive on scraps. It was meant for abundance, for deep joy, for love that doesn't evaporate after a moment. When you begin to see through the illusion, you realize that what the world calls freedom is nothing more than another shackle. And breaking free requires courage. Courage to reject the lie. Courage to hunger for something higher. Courage to fight for the purity that unlocks real joy. So the question isn't whether lust offers freedom. The question is whether we'll settle for its illusion, or whether we'll pursue the kind of freedom that cannot be shaken, the kind that doesn't vanish in the morning light, the kind that leaves you whole instead of hollow. That choice is in your hands. If you're serious about breaking free, I've put together 7 biblical secrets to destroy lust. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Get your copy today and start walking in real freedom. When desire becomes distorted, it does something far darker than most people realize. It strips away humanity. It turns flesh and blood into images, hearts into objects, and sacred souls into disposable commodities. That's the quiet cruelty of lust. It teaches us to stop seeing people as people. Think about it. Every person you pass on the street carries a story, a mind filled with dreams, fears, and hopes, and a soul created with infinite worth. But lust doesn't see any of that. It narrows the lens until all that remains is the body, a surface-level image detached from everything that makes that person real. And the tragedy is that once someone becomes just an object of desire, they are no longer treated with dignity, but consumed like a product. This is why lust is so destructive, not only to the one indulging in it, but to the one being reduced by it. When we give in, we silently participate in a system that cheapens what God designed as holy. We stop valuing covenant, intimacy, and sacrificial love, and instead settle for shallow consumption that leaves everyone emptier. Lust doesn't elevate people, it erases them. And here's the subtle danger. Once you've trained your mind to see people as objects, it becomes harder and harder to reverse. The heart no longer knows how to treasure, only how to take. This is why so many relationships fracture under the weight of lust. One person begins to feel unseen, unheard, unloved, not because their partner doesn't desire them, but because their partner only knows how to consume them. That is not love. It is theft masquerading as passion. The damage doesn't stop there. Lust not only dehumanizes others, it dehumanizes you. It slowly erodes your ability to love purely, to honor deeply, and to engage with someone as more than just a body. It chains the soul in a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction, leaving you restless and numb. Each indulgence promises fullness, but in the end you are emptier than before because you were never meant to feed your spirit with shadows. And the culture around us fuels this cycle relentless. Advertisements, entertainment, and even casual conversations turn people into visuals, into punchlines, into symbols of desire stripped of their sacred worth. The more often you're exposed to it, the more natural it begins to feel. The more normalized it is, the easier it is to forget that you are looking at someone's daughter, someone's son, someone who bears the very image of God. This is why lust is not just a private struggle. It's a cultural disease. It reshapes how entire societies see one another. When human dignity is lost, so is compassion. And when compassion fades, exploitation thrives. Look around and you'll see the consequences everywhere. Fractured families, broken marriages, industries built on the backs of exploitation, and individuals left hollow by a hunger that never ends. But there is a way back, and it begins with a shift in vision. If lust teaches you to strip away humanity, love restores it. The key is learning to look at people differently, not as bodies to be consumed, but as souls to be cherished. This isn't about suppressing desire, it's about transforming it. It's about allowing the Spirit of God to retrain your eyes and your heart until purity becomes not a restriction but a liberation. When you begin to see others as image bearers, everything changes. You no longer crave ownership. You long for covenant. You no longer settle for moments of thrill. You seek out lasting intimacy. You no longer live in chains. You live in freedom because your desires are finally aligned with their original desire. That's the truth lust doesn't want you to know. It cannot give you what you seek. It can only reduce, distort, and destroy. But love, the kind of love rooted in God's design, restores dignity to others and to you. And once you've tasted that, no counterfeit will ever satisfy again. It rarely happens in a single moment. No one wakes up one morning and says, "Today I will distance myself from God." Instead, it's almost always a slow drift, a quiet shifting of the heart, so subtle at first that it feels harmless. That's the danger, because what starts as a glance, a thought, a habit entertained in the shadows, gradually becomes a wall, and before we know it, the distance between us and God has widened. Think of it like a boat at sea. If the anchor isn't firmly in place, the current carries it away without the sailor even noticing. That's exactly how lust operates. It doesn't storm in like a hurricane announcing its destruction. It creeps in quietly, disguised as ordinary, disguised as acceptable, disguised as just a part of life. And while we're busy convincing ourselves that it isn't serious, our soul drifts further from the presence of the one who gives it life. The tragedy is that the heart cannot serve two masters. The more we feed lust, the less room we leave for God. And what happens then? Prayer feels shallow. Worship feels empty. Scripture that once burned with light now reads like words on a page. The things of God that used to stir joy and awe are replaced by numbness. This is not because God has moved, but because we've allowed our desires to steer us away from Him. Lust doesn't only stain the body, it clouds the mind. It reshapes how we see others and eventually how we see ourselves. A person once cherished as a son or daughter of God becomes in our eyes an object to consume. And when we start viewing people that way, we are no longer walking in love, but in selfishness. Selfishness is always the opposite of God's heart. That's why lust not only damages relationships with people, it fractures our intimacy with God Himself. And here lies the bitter irony. Lust convinces us we're chasing fulfillment. It whispers, "This will make you feel alive." But in reality, each step taken toward it is another step away from the true source of life. We run to lust for comfort, but in the process we abandon the comforter. We reach for false intimacy, but in doing so we push away the one who offers perfect love. Slowly, subtly, we trade the eternal for the temporary, the sacred for the shallow. But there is a deeper loss here than even the emptiness that follows lust. The greatest danger is that, if left unchecked, the soul begins to lose its hunger for God. What was once a faint drift becomes a vast distance. The voice of God, once clear and familiar, feels muffled. The Spirit's conviction, once sharp, grows faint. And in that silence, the soul mistakes absence for peace. That is the most terrifying deception of all, not knowing how far we've drifted because the waves felt so gentle. Yet this is not the end of the story, because no matter how far we drift, God does not abandon His children. The moment we turn back, He is there, ready, waiting, arms open. But here's the question: will we notice the drift before it's too late? Will we recognize the chains of lust for what they are, or will we keep convincing ourselves that everything is fine, that nothing is lost? The truth is, the drift can be stopped. The current doesn't have to carry us further and further away, but it requires honesty. It requires us to admit that lust is not harmless. It requires us to see that the emptiness it leaves behind is proof that it cannot satisfy. And it requires us to remember the joy we once knew in God's presence, a joy so much greater than any fleeting thrill. This is why the battle matters, not because God wants to rob us of pleasure, but because he longs to restore us to himself. Every step away from lust is a step back toward the Father. Every moment of surrender is an anchor dropped against the current. And when we finally taste the freedom he offers, we realize what lust promised was never worth the distance it created. Pleasure is easy. It doesn't take much to find it, chase it, and consume it. But joy, real joy, demands more of us. It doesn't come cheaply, and it doesn't vanish the moment the thrill fades. That's why the enemy is so eager to sell us hollow pleasure, because if he can keep us distracted with them, we'll never go searching for the deeper, richer life that joy was meant to give us. Think about what lust actually offers. It excites for a moment, then leaves emptiness in its wake. Like drinking salt water when you're thirsty, it promises to quench your desire, but only makes you thirstier than before. The cycle continues endlessly. Desire, indulgence, disappointment, and then the craving for more. And every time, the lie gets stronger. This next time will satisfy, but it never does. Contrast that with joy. Joy is not a fleeting spark. It's a fire that burns steadily. It is not about escaping reality, but embracing it. Pleasure divorced from purpose always fades, but joy rooted in truth only grows deeper with time. That's why lust feels so hollow compared to the fullness of God's design. One is shallow, the other is infinite. There's another trap here. Hollow pleasure convinces us that we're in control. It whispers that we can indulge a little, step away and come back whenever we want. But in reality, the appetite grows. It consumes thought, attention, energy, even identity. And before long, what began as entertainment turns into enslavement. That's the cost of hollow pleasure. It doesn't just fail to satisfy, it actively drains life from the soul. But joy does the opposite. Joy fills, joy renews. Joy doesn't use people, it honors them. It doesn't take life away, it multiplies it. And here's the paradox. When you live for hollow pleasure, you actually end up more empty than you started. But when you choose joy, even in small ways, you leave every moment richer than you found it. Ask yourself this. Which one do you see more of in the world around you? Pleasure is everywhere. Advertised, flaunted, normalized. Joy is harder to find. And that's because joy cannot be mass-produced, marketed, or commodified. It's too pure for that. Joy comes from living aligned with God's design, not from chasing what the world calls freedom. It is harder, yes, but it is also infinitely worth it. The truth is, many settle for hollow pleasure because it's easier. It doesn't require discipline, patience, or faith. But that ease is deceptive. It's like building your house on sand. It looks fine until the storm comes. And when it does, hollow pleasure offers no shelter. Joy, on the other hand, anchors you. It weathers storms. It carries you through pain. It outlasts the highs and lows of circumstance. This is why the pursuit of joy is so dangerous to the enemy. Because once someone discovers that true joy is deeper, fuller, and more satisfying than hollow pleasure, they can never be fooled again. They'll see through the illusion. They'll know the cheap counterfeit for what it is. And suddenly, temptation loses its power. That's the invitation. Not deny desire, but to redeem it. Not to kill passion, but to direct it towards something that actually satisfies. The battle isn't about rejecting joy, it's about refusing to settle for less. Hollow pleasure tells you to take what you can when you can, because it might be all you get. Joy says something radically different. You were made for more and nothing less will do. So the question is simple. Will you keep drinking salt water, or will you finally turn to the fountain that never runs dry? One leads to emptiness, the other to abundance. One leaves you restless, the other leaves you whole. We are living in an age where what was once whispered in secret is now shouted from billboards, streaming platforms, and every glowing screen in our hands. Lust is no longer the intruder people keep hidden in shame. It's been rebranded as entertainment, empowerment, and even self-expression. And here lies the danger. When culture celebrates something destructive, Resisting it feels like swimming upstream. But if you never fight against the current, you will always end up where the river takes you, and that river leads straight to emptiness. The temptation is to shrug and say everyone does it. Everyone looks. Everyone indulges. That's the lie that keeps millions trapped. Just because something has become common doesn't mean it has become harmless. Poison doesn't lose its power simply because it's popular. In fact, the more the culture normalizes lust, the more corrosive it becomes, eroding the soul little by little, until you no longer feel the weight of it. And that is when it's most dangerous, when sin feels ordinary. You have to understand, resistance isn't about repression, it's about direction. The desire itself is not evil. God created it with purpose. But when you allow culture to hijack it, what was meant for intimacy and love is twisted into addiction and objectification. To resist is to reclaim what was stolen, to refuse to let your heart be shaped by the world's cheap counterfeits. And the truth is, every time you say no to the culture's version of lust, you are saying yes to something far greater. You are protecting your future, your mind, your relationships, and most importantly, your connection with God. But here's the hard truth. Resistance will cost you. You will feel the pull of isolation when you choose purity in a world that mocks it. You will feel the sting of self-denial when you cut off access to the things that feed temptation. You may even feel misunderstood by friends or peers who see no problem with indulging. But what you gain is far greater than what you lose. You gain freedom. You gain clarity. You gain strength that cannot be bought or faked. Think of it like training a muscle. At first, every rep feels heavy. Every moment of resistance feels exhausting. But over time, the very act of saying no builds endurance. And soon what once had the power to enslave you begins to lose its grip. Culture thrives on passivity. It wants you to be numb, distracted, compliant. Resistance forces you to wake up. It forces you to live with intention, not just impulse. So how do you resist in a practical way? You starve what feeds lust, and you feed what strengthens the spirit. That means cutting off the sources. Yes, the websites, the shows, the songs, the secret habits. It means surrounding yourself with truth that renews your mind. It means replacing shallow pleasure with deeper joy, prayer, scripture, meaningful relationships, acts of service. Because here's the secret. Lust cannot survive in an environment of real love. Real love suffocates it. Real love strips it of power. And make no mistake, the culture will not stop pushing. The images will keep flashing. The temptations will keep knocking. The voices will keep telling you this is just who you are. But you don't have to listen. You don't have to let the culture write your story. You don't have to hand over your future for the sake of a fleeting thrill. You can resist, and in resisting, you can break free. There is a deeper joy waiting on the other side of that choice, one that lust can never counterfeit. The question is simple. Will you conform to a culture that numbs the soul, or will you rise against it and discover the freedom you were created to live in? The truth is simple but sobering. Lust always takes more than it gives. It strips away peace, weakens the soul, and blinds us to the beauty of God's design. But you don't have to live enslaved. Freedom isn't just possible. It's promised when you align your life with truth instead of the lies culture keeps feeding you. The choice is yours. Keep chasing the empty cycle, or step into the kind of strength and purity that leads to real joy. If you're ready to break free, I want to put something in your hands that will help you. I've written a guide called 7 Biblical Secrets to Destroy Lust Before It Destroys You. It's practical, it's powerful, and it's designed to equip you for victory. The link is in the description. Grab your copy today and take the first step into freedom.